podcast? Tell me what happened, because I can't even remember what we're calling it. We talked about a few things, and you said, you know what, put a pin in that, and I'm going to go ask the mushrooms what to call this podcast. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. So what happened?
So I dosed last night, and it was
say I dosed.
I took my tea, my Amanita tea.
Okay.
And then I got busy doing shit and totally forgot about it. And then it was late, and I was like, oh my God. So I took some more, and I got high and started playing video games and forgot about it and went to bed. And I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, and the mushroom was like, hey, didn't you need a name for the podcast? This is what they do. I said, oh, God bless you. Yes.
Because we were at a loss.
Totally. We came up with some good names, but they weren't right.
Okay, so what did the mushrooms tell you?
They gave me really stupid things. I'm like, y'all, really? These are really bad. Gretchen's going to kill me. And they were like, snicker, snicker, you know. I was like, y'all be serious.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, okay, FungiPhonic. And I'm like, oh,
FungiPhonic.
that's beautiful. Thank
it is
you.
Beautiful.
And they were like, we got you.
You know, I love the name so much. I am so excited that we have it. I did express a little bit of an issue with the word fungi because of the pronunciation. Some people say fungi, fungi. And I think it's fine because both you and I say fungi. And so that's just what's going to happen in these recordings. But that parlays perfectly into the first thing I want to talk about with the topic that we chose today, which is psilocybin.
You mean psilocybin? Psilocybes?
Look, I just don't know. I'm trying to say it the way everybody else says it. Psilocybin. And it's going to be really hard for me. So I'm going to go in and out from psilocybin and psilocybin. And here's the deal with that. Here's the deal with pronunciation is that when you are a reader, which you and I are both readers, you might not be the best pronunciator of things.
The sayer of things?
Yes. And I think that both psilocybin and psilocybin are acceptable. I think psilocybin is what most everybody uses. So I'm going to try my best to say psilocybin.
I've never heard psilocybin.
You mean psilocybin?
I've heard psilocybin.
Oh, man. A third thing that's hard to even metabolize at this point. Oh, gosh. So that is just a forewarning. There is going to be a lot of pronunciation issues with this word, and it's just going to be okay.
I just call them God.
Are you there, God? It's me, dreamer. Okay, the first thing that I want to talk about with this topic is where does psilocybin fit into the world of mushrooms? And where in the field of mushrooms does it fit into the world of human beings? So I am a grower and hunter of mushrooms. And in my world, they fit very snugly into a little portion. And it's going to be very different from where they fit into your world, I think. There are 4 types of mushrooms as it relates to human beings. They're culinary, which we eat them for calories. We eat them for nutrition. There's medicinal, like reishi, which we eat for the adaptogenic functionality of the medicinal compounds. There are poisonous, like the vomiter, like jack-o'-lantern mushrooms, and they generally affect our lower gastric GI situation. A lot of throwing up. They won't kill you, but you will wish you were dead. And then the lethal deadly ones, which is destroying angel, and the ones with phallotoxins and amatoxins. And that's it. Those are the 4. And I think I might know which category you would put psilocybin in, but I know the category that I would put them in. And I think they're 2 different categories.
I say they're medicine.
Yeah. And I knew you were going to say that. And every time I put them in the poisonous category, I get in trouble. And it's difficult because in the world of where do you actually fit into, they are definitely poisonous. And the reason they're poisonous is the degree of onset, like the time and degree of onset, which is 30 minutes to 2 hours. So if you take a reishi tincture or something like that, you have no degree of onset of symptoms at all. It's nutrition-based, it's medicinal-based, it's at the cellular level. You don't have any symptoms. That's what medicinal means in this world. Whereas poisonous, you get symptoms within 30 minutes to 2 hours. I think the important thing is a symptom might not be not pleasurable. It might be super, super fun and wonderful, but it's still a symptom. I know you're giving me the look that I get from everybody. Like, no, this is medicinal. Of course it's medicinal because it helps, but it is also poisonous. There is a study called Toxicological Profiles of Poisonous, Edible, and Medicinal Mushrooms. The hallucinogenic toxic syndrome, which is psilocybin, and it gives you hallucinogenic effects.
The problem is in terminology. And I think that everyone agrees that if you get a positive benefit from something, it was medicine for you. There are practices that don't involve a drug that are positive that could be medicine. And when you say symptom, then that's another word that we get into terminology, because reishi, if I take a high dose, I definitely get very calm and sleepy and take a really good nap if I take too much of it. If I take too much lion's mane, I'll get a headache. That's negative. I'll get racy brain. I'll get anxiety. That sounds toxic to me. That sounds poisonous. There are some people that can take a lot of reishi and get into highly spiritual realms with it. So there's this crossover with fungi that I think are why fungi cause so much emotional response in people, because we can say a plant is medicine. We can say a plant will get you high. We can say a plant just tastes good. But when it comes to fungi, there's this spectrum where they seem to be just tasty all the way to they'll kill you. And I think it's a spectrum. And I don't think that there's separate categories. I think that they flow. And I think reishi is spiritual. I think it's medicinal. I think it's toxic. And it's all dose dependent. Same with lion's mane. Same with psilocybin. And the same with the destroying angels and the deadly ones. The dose just happens to be don't ingest it. But that doesn't mean you can't hold it while you walk and start to get really beautiful effects from it. Just don't swallow it. Just don't put it in your body. And I would put that at the very top of the powerful fungi, where I would put things like the Caesars, which are the Jacksonii Amanitas for us. I would put them closer to the other end of the spectrum where they taste amazing. But if you eat a little too many, you may not feel so good. Yeah. It may make you a little nauseous. But I think that's why we have this fascination with fungi, because they look crazy. They do crazy things. They look wild. They're more like animals than they are like plants. They have big personalities. And they draw us in and infect us and make us do their will and get obsessed with them, or cause so much fear in a way that plants don't seem to.
That's coming right from early humans. Because Doug once tried one and, had ego death, whereas Steve tried one and he died. It's the same way we feel about snakes, because most snakes that we see are perfectly harmless, but, we're running when we see them because there's something ancestrally in every human on the planet that's like, oh, girl, you better run. Better get out of here. And that's how mushrooms are, because mushrooms, I feel like, helped us evolve the way we have with our neuroplasticity in the first place. I think it was a much bigger deal than we give it credit for in our prehistory of being human beings. I do. And I think that it probably dictated where cultures even lived? You know, where are these present?
I'm actually willing to move from where I am now to where I know there are far more Amanita muscaria, that fruit, because we can't grow them or cultivate them. We have to follow them. And I agree with that.
Back to the recognized toxins. The recognized toxins in mushrooms are amatoxins, phallotoxins, those are your deadlies. And they cause death in 25% roughly of everyone who ingests them. Generally, there's a liver transplant to save the life. There's a toxin called austroleucin, and that's in Pleurotus austraeus. There's ageratin, which is in Agaricus bisporus. There's orelanin, Pleurotus austraeus, and Cortinarius orelanis. That's the one that ghost whisperer guy found, and he poisoned his whole family and himself. Yeah. Do you know about that story?
No.
Yeah. He's actually such a good guy, such a bro for even talking about it. He talks about it openly. And it was one of those webcap Cortinarius species, northern latitude. I think they were in Scotland or something like that. He wrote The Horse Whisperer. He's the author of The Horse Whisperer. And they cooked something. They were traveling, which I think is the number one risk factor for any type of poisoning. Should never eat anything until you've had it in your hand like 3 to 5 times. Like, just get to know it. It's just respectful to get to know the mushroom before you eat it.
It's not just knowing your mushroom, it's knowing your land. Mm-hmm. And you recently put out a video that I saw where you were talking about how important it is to continue to walk the same land season after season, over and over.
There's a lot of reports of toxicity from California, where there's populations of people who have lived for a long time in like East Asian areas, and they are in California, and they mistake the phalloidy, Amanita phalloidy, for matsutake.
Really?
Yeah, and matsutake does occur there. Populations that are already at risk, whether it's immigrant populations or just populations newer to the area who were used to finding matsutake and misidentifying it, a death cap. You could find an oyster mushroom, and it could be, I'm going back to my list, an angel wing, which eventually kills like 25% of the people who eat it. Not immediately, but and that's on one of the lists of the toxins. And in the show notes, I will put all of these poisonous mushrooms. But back to my original point, and there are others that I didn't go through, like, of course, ibotenic acid, muscimol, muscarine, acromelic acid, which is a psilocybin, and then the last one is psilocybin and psilocin. So these are the known toxins, the known will cause effects in your body within 2 to 3 hours, and that's the poisonous variety. And then the deadly variety will be about 6 to 8 hours. So that's just a way for healthcare professionals to sort of understand what you've ingested. But whether we like it or not, psilocybin is listed as a known toxin, and so is Amanita muscaria, which is a difficult thing to metabolize because they are so helpful. But the chemistry of what we're talking about is what is so fascinating. So the main psychedelic component of magic mushrooms is psilocybin. Psychedelic effects are believed to emerge through stimulation of serotonin 2A receptors. 5-HT2ARs or serotonin, those terms are interchangeable here, by psilocybin's active metabolite, psilocin. So what this does is it triggers profound visual hallucinations, regardless of whether your eyes are open. This is all due to the visual cortex, where a high number of those 2A receptors are present. So psilocybin binds particularly well to these 2A receptors. Yeah, so just getting into the neuropharmacology of this whole thing, and I know this is dense stuff, but some people are interested in what's going on in the brain. So the N,N-dimethyltryptamine, which is the long word for, DMT. It is a potent psychoplastogen, a compound capable of promoting rapid and sustained neuroplasticity that may have wide-ranging therapeutic benefits. So I am talking about the same study here, but there are studies over and over again talking about this neuroplasticity, all of these therapeutic benefits. So the big question here, and this is the big question of this topic, is how can this be categorized as a poison when it's such a natural phenomenon? The molecular properties, just to expand upon that, the component of triamine type 4, that dimethyltryptamine, which is the DMT, it's a substituted tryptamine that occurs in many plants and animals naturally, including humans, and which is both a derivative and a structural analog of tryptamine. And just to be clear, tryptamine that I'm talking about, this is not related to the trip, quote unquote. It models serotonin itself. DMT is used as a psychedelic drug and prepared by various cultures for religious purposes and as an entheogen. So which is it? Are we using a poison or are we using a medicine?
They think also there's some more involved in it. And that I think it was H2.
5-HT2ARs, which is basically serotonin. That's our little
I tried to find it before I got here. There was like a new study that came out that they believe that that's not the primary mechanism of action anymore. That it needs serotonin to boost. I mean, it needs to boost those receptors, but that's not the primary thing that it's doing. Mm-hmm. That there's a closing off, a dampening, and a shutting down of parts of the brain that are involved in noticing reality and trying to create reality and trying to make sense of everything. The skeptical part of the brain that says, okay, well, I'll ignore. And a lot of what we see as reality or believe is reality is more about what we ignore than about what we create. And so a lot of issues with attention are because the parts of the brain that say ignore aren't ignoring. Those parts of the brain are asleep. And people that can just focus, they're turning off the AC that's clicking on and off, or the kids that are running and playing outside, or how uncomfortable their clothing is. All of that's getting turned off. And a lot of our healthy functioning is more about what's getting turned off than what's getting turned on. And so the theory is that the part of the way that we trip on psilocybin is the bumping of the receptors, serotonin receptors, but also the dampening of basically suspending your belief in certain reality constructs. And that part of the brain that's usually active saying, don't pay attention to that, that's not real, and this doesn't work that way, and that quietens the brain, is actually turned off so that a lot of that becomes active. Active in the sense of, well, let's open to the possibility. Let's allow the brain to run wild. Let's allow these new sensory inputs without stopping and going, now, wait a minute, that's not right. Because when it first comes on, one of the first things, the very, very, very first thing that happens is the colors get really bright and sharp. Yeah. That's how you first know. And I think if we didn't have that part of the brain shutting off that tells you to calm the fuck down, we would probably just be like, whatever, and not pay attention to that, and sort of put that into a category of, and then it would be switched off to the point where we just don't even notice that the colors got sharper or brighter. The same way we don't notice that gap in our vision between our eyes. Mm-hmm. The brain quietens that so that you're not always looking at your blind spot. You know? Yeah. So when colors get brighter, you'll notice people believe it. They go, "Do you see that? Do you see that?" Yeah. Like that's immediate. They can't help but react because it's simultaneously bumping of things and the shutting off of the disbelief. And then when you get those things crossing, you get this heightened sense of, oh my God. Mm.
Well, we ask our brains to do that when we're sober. We go to a movie. I just went and saw Mission Impossible. The suspension of disbelief is real. You ask your brain to do that. You're like, okay, I'm in a movie. Everything here is fine, even though it makes no sense in reality. We ask our brains to do that all the time when we are doing our playtime, whether it's reading a book or watching a movie or even playing Monopoly with our families. I think the suspension of disbelief, if that can be exercised.
I think we do.
Well, within the trip itself.
You have so little control over anything when you're under the influence of that. The control that we have is working with it, but it's definitely leading. And I think part of the skill of learning how to use it as a medicine is learning how to step into ownership of your consciousness with it, to work with it. But I think people, the first couple of times that they use it, are just so overwhelmed by the power of it that they struggle to do anything of their own will. And I think the growth comes in learning how to step into that and go, oh, wait a minute, I do have power here. I can talk to the mushroom, ask for things, set boundaries, set limits, say no.
Yeah.
But I think even without that drug, we do that on a regular basis. And I think it's why this drug is so amazing for people, because a lot of suffering comes from the inability to ignore. So my trauma response when I'm having a conversation with someone and I've accidentally interrupted them, you know, all that shame from childhood and my processing disorder and getting in trouble for it clouds my ability to enjoy this conversation. The end of the day and that whole productivity thing, did I accomplish enough? And the shame that sets in at 5 o'clock because I didn't get things done, like that creates misery. That's suffering. And our ability to overcome that continuous voice, that's therapy. That's what we meditate for. That's why we pay for therapy. That's the work, is to shut that stuff up. So the quietening of things, that ability to suspend reality, which in this case sucks, for a better one that I'm making up and creating, where I say I'm safe until I can believe it. So we're doing it with and without the drug. And I think the best thing that I'm getting out of using psilocybin is it says, it's okay to do that. Let me show you how. We do it really well here.
I mean, that sounds appealing to, and I've never really had, and you and I talked about this before, I've never really had a desire to do it because I just felt like my trauma, the history of my life never put me at a level where I'm like, okay, I need therapies that are that strong. And I always kind of felt like it was a tad disrespectful for me to say, okay, given the life that I've led, and I've had personal failings, I've had professional failings, I've had all of the normal letdowns and mistakes and embarrassments that normal people have. I don't want to say I don't struggle the way a normal person does. But there's nothing that I can point to that I need to heal from in terms of the stories that I've heard from others about PTSD, sexual abuse, all of those things. And I've never put myself in a category of, hey, I need to heal from these things. And I am very privileged that none of those things have happened to me. And that's why I've been reticent to go there. And I know that you might have something to say about that.
I do.
Yeah.
And I've heard of people like you. I just didn't know you existed.
Hey.
I always thought that was such bullshit because I come from such a place of so much trauma. And it's like, there is no one on this planet without trauma.
Well, and I don't want to minimize my personal failings. I mean, I grew up in a house that there was religious trauma, you know, but I don't want to minimize that for others. I tend to minimize things for myself. And that might be a coping mechanism that I should work on. But my body has never been touched when I didn't want it to be. And that is a huge privilege to be a grown-up who can say that. And I don't know why I reserve this medicine for that level of trauma.
Because that's what your government has said it's okay for.
Oh, I want to talk about the government a lot. We got to get there.
And we were all gaslighted into thinking that these things were just dangerous and they would make you crazy.
Sure.
And then when the government started being like, okay, well, you can study it for research. And then, okay, well, it's okay if you've had a lot of trauma. And then all we hear about is, see, it's helping people with trauma. See, it's helping people with trauma. But that's only to appease our governmental overlords to say it's not harmful. It's helping people. But that's because we're playing their game. But it's actually something completely different. Yes, on the outset, you can't get to what it's really for if you're still living in a lot of trauma. It's an onion. You got to peel the layers away. You can't get to the good stuff until it can help you get rid of all the crap and the toxicity. But as it's doing that, the good stuff is weaving its way through those stories and through that healing from the core and from wherever this is coming from, so that you already get into these nature of reality existential places pretty early on. And then I'm grateful for the trauma, because if I didn't suffer from so much trauma, I would not have overcome the terror of taking it that my government made me feel. And if we had been raised 5,000 years ago where this was normal, you don't need trauma to take it. It's a normal part of mental health and staying clean and staying normal and healthy and aware and using all your superpowers as a human and being one with the land and being a good human. It's part of just being a good human. And that used to be the way that these were seen. And I get it now. But today it's not. You've got to be really, really sick to be willing to do something this terrifying.
Yeah, we need to talk about this. So in the United States, the first state to have decriminalized, and I'm using that word intentionally, I'm not saying legalized, because they've decriminalized it in Oregon. And that happened as of January 1st of this year. It took a couple of weeks for the powers that be on the state level to provide an avenue for therapists, mental health professionals to become certified to give this type of therapy with psilocybin, okay? So this is all brand new. You know, we're recording this in August. So this has been 8 months. So within, a couple of weeks, a convention or, sort of it's not a convention. It was like kind of like it was a certification process that was state mandated, okay? And only 24 people, therapists, social workers, whatever, signed up for it. And I was like, why would only 24 people sign up for this? And this is how you would become state certified to give this type of, I'm going to say, sterile type of therapeutics. And I am all about talk therapy. I am all about licensed professionals being held responsible by their licensing board. I think all of that is essential to prevent fraud, to prevent harm, all of that. But 24 people, wow, it's because the class cost $10,000. Cost $10,000 over 4 days. So it was $250. You had to stay at the hotel and here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. There were no mushrooms present because they weren't quite legal yet. So they sat around for $10,000 and meditated and tried to get to a different plane of whatever, ego death, whatever, with no mushrooms. So,
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say there was a corporation middleman involved in this.
There was a hotel. There was and it's just okay, so can we ask ourselves here? Because there are certain places in Colorado, certain places in
Washington State,
California, and Wisconsin.
There's cities.
Yeah, Wisconsin.
There's cities in Michigan, like Ann Arbor. Yep. That's where I did my first
Right.
dose
Right.
was in Ann Arbor right after they decriminalized
So
it.
this guy, there are certain municipalities where it's been decriminalized, right? So it's hard not to bring up the fact that if there are people trying to decriminalize it and they are working with state governments, because of course, federally, this is still a Schedule 1 drug, right? So we're talking about state by state. I got to follow the money here. What is happening? Who is able to give these therapies? Is it being gatekept? Is it being whitewashed? If it were up to me, if it was government Gretchen, it would be, these are not decriminalized. They're just legal, but no one can sell them. You cannot make money off of these. That to me is the intent of the mushroom. And I feel like people would talk to people like you, like Indigenous elders, like the people who have been using this drug for decades, centuries. And it would be more of a, I'm going to go speak with the people who know about this, and no one can make money. I think it's so wrong to capitalize a little bit.
I'm going to disagree with you on your take on not being able to sell them, because that is an idyllic attitude to have in 2023, late stage capitalistic, dark ages of entheogens for 50, 60 years. We're at a place where we are so far away from idyllic, which would be living close to the land, living locally, and having elders that we respect, that we get our information from, while we together nurture each other as a community. But we haven't existed like that for a very long time, and we have all suffered under what started, the religions mostly that started 2,000 to 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That have taken over all of those practices and then whitewashed all of it to suck it up into different religious affiliations that itself branched off. And even not the white religions, but there's a lot of other religions on the planet that did the same thing to all of these entheogenic medicines, and slowly took us away from the forest and the land and elder wisdom in favor of deities of the church. And once that happened, we started breaking. And we are looking now at what happens 2,000 years later to people. Yeah. We're broken. And when you say, yeah, but we shouldn't be able to sell them, except that we don't live where most people can even begin to grow them or make them or have that ability. And they're struggling to put food on the table. They're struggling to just get their basic medical needs met. So even if the government just suddenly threw it all wide open and said it's all legal, most people don't know how to even begin. And we are in a capitalistic society where we've still got to eat. And it is a full-time job educating people. And so if we want that again, if we want people that educate about these things and facilitate the use of them and get them for you, they have to be compensated. Or they're going to have to be poor their whole lives and live off the community, a community they trust that will support them and get their needs met for them. And we are a long way from that. So for now, they need to be, I trust people that this is all they do for a living. And I will only get my mushrooms from people that have a long history of working with that strain and a long history of shamanism. And they know what they're doing, before I will trust somebody that finds one in the forest and goes, ooh, let's eat this.
Right.
Right. And those people need to be supported financially. So people who help me and they use their wisdom of those mushrooms, and then they look at me and they listen to me and they do this intake with me. It's this conversation and their wisdom. When they pull what they believe I need and they make it and they present it to me in a cup, that's great and all, except that they have a house and a mortgage and a car payment. And I pay them for that service and for all of the thousands of dollars of equipment it took to grow that in a house, not in the woods.
I'm going to push back right back to you. Nothing you've described to me is capitalism. Nothing. What you've described to me is paying for services and paying for labor. I do believe that people should be paid for their labor and they should own the means of their own production. And with a mushroom like this that is saprophytic, meaning it grows off decaying material, and in many cases, animal material that's also decaying. These things can be grown in a tub for like $30, right? But if you don't have a corporation and you're not profiting off of the labor of others in a capitalistic environment, what I mean is the corporate sales. So you told me you were at the MAPS conference in Denver, right?
Yeah.
Were you there for
That was weird.
It was weird.
That was a very weird experience.
We're going to clown on this convention. I do want to talk about MAPS and Rick Doblin and his speech and what happened during his speech. Were you there for that?
No, I left. I knew what was about to go down, and I'm like, I am too emotional of a human to witness this.
I had the audio of the protest where a group of activists, Earth Guardians and social justice activists, pounded their drums and came down the aisles during Rick Doblin's, I think, keynote speech, where like sold out house, right? So it's like boom, 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 boom. And they started coming up and Rick Doblin, and this is where I'm going to clown on him a little bit. And I'm not denouncing him as a whole person. I'm sure, he's done so much for so many people, but he's up there wearing a Andy Warhol style shirt that had 4 pictures of himself that said legalize Rick Doblin, which the optics were just terrible, with him up there with the microphone.
Can I just, before you tell this amazing story, people who are proponents of MAPS or don't know about MAPS.
Will you tell everybody what MAPS is?
Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Yeah, that's it. Yep, MAPS.
And when they first started out, I was all about it and could not believe it and told everyone I knew. I was like, holy shit, like this is what we've needed for so long.
And that's what Rick started, right?
And it was great because it finally started the conversation with the government to go, you know what? Your laws are not cool. They violate how these drugs actually work. They're just flat out lies and they're wrong, and we need them because they will help people. I thought that they were going to use the trauma model and the healing depression model just as a way to play the governmental game to get in the door, and that the goal was eventually to fling the doors wide open to legality. And then along the way, they started doing some really weird things, like working with pharmaceutical companies for drug trials, working with corporations that deal in therapies and, all of the clinical stuff. And I get that that was necessary as an in, but then they doubled down when people were working on grassroots movements in these states on decriminalization. They would go in and lobby to undo the things that the people in their own states were saying they wanted. Grassroots movements, people that spent their own money and years of their lives working toward that point, MAPS would come in and in less than 24 hours buy a different decision in those people's home states, in their own lives, in their own areas, with their own representatives in their own state Congress. But I've watched it happen over and over and over. And I went from being a massive proponent of what MAPS was doing to going, wait, y'all, come on. Really? This is not cool. This is so not cool.
Yeah. I think there's a $200 million slush fund that they're working with to do exactly the things that you're talking about. This is what caused this protest. And it was a beautiful protest. So this guy, he was the second to speak. They came down the aisles, drums beating. And Rick is up on stage with his T-shirt and with his little microphone. And I think he was like, oh shit, okay, I better let them speak. And he did. And I don't know if you've seen the videos of how they speak, but they interrupted his keynote speech. And to his credit, he did allow them to speak for a while. And there's one person named Kuthumi Nirmal. He is an Earth Guardian and social justice activist. And I transcribed the audio because the audio was very poor on everything and we don't own the copyright to that. So I went ahead and transcribed it. And so I want to read it to you. And I'm really glad that you haven't heard it because I want your opinion on this. And this is mostly a direct quote. It's so hard to be in front up here. This is very challenging. I want you to be aware that you have been deceived by this movement. The psychedelic renaissance is not really a psychedelic renaissance. The plant medicine is renaissance within the Western system, but it has been happening for decades through indigenous people. We open our medicines for you to heal, not to take. You're taking it, you're colonizing it. The same happened to tobacco. Now it causes cancer. The same happened to opioids. Now it causes addiction. The same happened to coca. Now cocaine causes a lot of harm. Please look at the cycle of colonization and how this continues to happen. Many decades from now, you're going to see the medicine harming you because they're living beings and they don't like to be abused. They're going to come back for you and harm you. We're here because we love you. We're here because we don't want you to harm yourselves. We love you. I love myself. I love my tradition. I love the earth. And we need to study liberation together. This is not a collective liberation movement. This is a capitalization. Have conversations, including us. I mean, I just have chills.
And I'm over here trying not to cry.
I know. It's exactly what I feel about this situation. And and I've been reading these words over and over again. And they almost affect me differently every time I read them.
The problem is that corporations are looking at extraction, whereas people are looking at whole medicine and reciprocity and cooperation. And those two methods are at odds with each other, and they cannot coexist. They can't coexist. So then, what are we going to do about that? And it feels like we're begging our overlords to stop being our overlords. And I don't know how we do that. If the people want, first of all, to stop colonizing indigenous cultures, not just the medicine, but indigenous cultures completely, then they can't exist anymore. Because the only way a corporation can exist is by theft of resources. But then if you just talk about the medicines themselves, I think most people, when they talk about using it, even buying a product in a store, they assume it's the whole mushroom packaged in a way that makes it easy to understand how to use it, that has been approved through a process that we trust, and easy for me to take home and use. I think that's the assumption. But what happens when corporations do this kind of thing is they wind up isolating it out of the whole thing, isolating a single component of it, because Western medicine is obsessed with isolating compounds, and then extracting through some method that's toxic, washing it with toxic chemicals, and then embedding it in something that won't go bad, which is also going to be toxic with preservatives that are toxic in a method that they can ship around. And when you take something like that out of its whole state, we don't know what the repercussions are down the line of that until we do know. And then it'll go, oh, my bad. They just pay up for the lawsuit.
Right.
That's it. They don't even learn from it.
Set aside
and
money.
They just keep marching forward.
Yeah.
And that's what they've done with these medicines. And especially look at marijuana. Where's a wild plant now? Who grows a wild plant? And that's why even trying to find marijuana seeds from the 70s would be like gold, because it's gone, because corporations took it and now they've isolated it into all of its individuals, which, okay, that's great. Why don't we let some people who love that work do that work? But the fact that you just make it illegal for everyone now to use it, touch it, play with it, and then we're only going to let corrupt people isolate it out and then dope that back to you.
Yep.
That's the corrupt part. Sure, take it, mess with it, find terpenes, that work and package them to cure some particular symptom. That's great. But also, let's make it legal so people can just grow the original plant.
Right.
And it's unique to them because they've been hybridizing it naturally, pollinating it. And you can go to Billy Joe down the street's plant because it's going to be really sweet weed, or.
And the thing that you're talking about over and over and over again is obtaining healing substances through community. And that's what I mean by not making money off of it. I think that if you're making money off of growing a plant or growing a mushroom, you're making money from your labor, the time of your labor. That's what I'm all for. It's just like, this is the cost of this because this is how much time I put into it. Not, this is a product. This is what this product costs. There's a very nuanced difference here. And it's something that's just not, it's something that humans almost can't be trusted with. And I'm at odds about all of it. I'm just at odds. Like, I have this thought experiment for you to sort of like.
I make and sell my own products, and I'm about to finally get them out of my house so I can have my house back again and have them made in a facility.
Yeah.
And sold.
Yeah.
For a charge, for a price.
Yes.
In stores.
Yes.
Labeled with what the government approves that I can label it as.
Yes. And none of those things are what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about.
It could be what I'm talking about. But that's going to be the hard part, is not allowing investors to dictate how that is extracted and what it's put in. That it's got to be done in a way that I believe is ethical and sustainable and moral.
Yes.
That's why I haven't done it so far. And all these bad products are all over the market, and I'm not out there ahead of it because it has taken me a lot of my own time and money going to these places and going, I'm not going to work with you unless this is the deal. Right. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that. And so I'm sitting here watching all these bad products get created that are harming the industry. And I'm not out there in the front of it making my own, going, no, this is how it's supposed to be done, because it takes time to find the right people that are willing to do it that way.
Well, I think it's also worth noting that you're not talking about psilocybin. You're talking about Amanita muscaria, which is a perfectly legal mushroom. I think it's important that we're talking about the same thing here, because if you are processing your own, or even if you hire a lab who you will pay for their time, and that money will then be recouped in your product. This is all not corporation level stuff. It's when there's a corporation that has 100 people on the payroll and they're getting minimum wage. That's a great indicator that you're down the wrong path. But
the fact that the entity, my mushroom that I work with, my people, my gods, are legal.
Yeah.
And this one isn't, makes zero sense.
That's crazy. Makes no sense.
Except that, you can profit off of it.
Yeah.
And keep it away from the people while you then go through these processes of extraction. And like that MAPS conference that I went to, I would say it was 2 conferences held in the same building is what it turned out to be.
Oh.
There were the booths, which were incredibly expensive to have. So that right there weeded out mom and pop growers,
right?
Individual people that are making and want to sell products and things made with it, and jewelry and, shamanism and indigenous booths and all that thing. I think there were only 2 indigenous booths, had to have huge corporate sponsors to be able to afford to be there. Mm-hmm. And so it was surreal to have a psychedelic conference that was sterile looking and corporate logos everywhere and weird shit, like mask thing that you wear with lights and stuff and all these biometric feedback things, which technology, great. But like, what does that have to do with psychedelics? That's right. You're sidestepping the psychedelic thing to just sort of ride on the coattails of psychedelia. Mm-hmm. There were so many ketamine clinic booths. And I made a video of like, here, come with me to the conference. And I videoed every booth. I skipped all of those because there were just so many ketamine booths. It's crazy. And it was predominantly certification and providers and all corporate stuff. But mixed in there, I guess they had to allow a certain number of nonprofits. Those were the ones I really gravitated toward. And it was pleasant to see that other side. And those were the people where there were people just like me hanging out at those booths.
Yeah.
And then there were the suits. And they were hobnobbing and exchanging information. And so there was a corporate show going on right next to booths that were our people going on.
Yeah.
And our people were networking with each other just in the aisles. We didn't have booths. We were exchanging information and saying, have you heard about so-and-so? You know, he's growing his own. And like, oh my God, no, come here. You got to meet him. And then we would run across to this other place and then text each other. Where are you? I'm at the so-and-so booth. I'll be there in a minute. I want you to meet so-and-so. Okay, let me get your information. That whole conference was also going on.
I hear you talking about community once again.
And it was so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I will say the MAPS conference is more about MDMA. And Rick Doblin is more about MDMA, all that sort of thing. What we're talking about is DMT. And it's similar from what I understand. But what's so bizarre about DMT, which is the main chemical component in psilocybin. So if you look at the actual mushroom itself that grows outside that you pick, you bring it inside, okay? Nobody had to grow anything. Everything's just right there in nature for you, which I cannot say about any of the other lab-based products, right? So that's how our little discussion is just so different, right? Even though the effects are the same on the human body, potentially, it's just so different because the chemical compound is like, has like a little phosphate ester on it, and then it has DMT. And this is literally what it looks like. Phosphate ester, DMT. You eat it, and it goes down into your stomach. The phosphate ester gets metabolized, right? Hydrolyzed in vivo, which basically means like metabolized, for lack of a better word. And once it does that, then it's psilocin. And then psilocin and serotonin are near identical chemical compounds when you actually look at them. The only difference is psilocin and serotonin differ only by the hydroxyl group. One being on the 4th position, one being on the 5th position. The 5th position is the psilocin. 4th position is serotonin. And then there's just a little bit of difference between like the dimethyl groups of nitrogen on the other side. You've got this compound that wants to go to your receptors by a simple hydrolyzed process. Nobody had to do anything in a lab. That's different. That is different. Am I wrong?
Different from what?
Ketamine. Is it different from MDMA? I mean,
well, we're talking about man-made synthetic medicines versus natural whole medicines. And the issue that I have with man-made is we think that we're all that and we're so smart and that we've got so much figured out about the human body when we don't know shit. And while, yes, you can take a drug a man-made drug, and force your receptors, certain receptors, to bend to your will, it's never permanent change because we're going in and manhandling an unnatural process and forcing it to do something and then letting go. And watching the body go, well, that was interesting, while it fixes what you just did and goes back to whatever that original state was of depression. Whereas natural living medicine has all of these entourage effects and chemicals on board with them that also do a lot of other things simultaneously while you're on that experience, going into the body and healing where trauma is stored systemically in the body, unraveling and unattaching. And that's why people throw up and they get diarrhea, because you are literally shedding and dumping toxins while you're going through this process. And you don't just feel better, you are healing. And these medicines are healing. They're creating permanent change little by little as you do the work of integration in the process, working with it. And then after the process, integrating it, doing that work, you're actually healing and changing your body permanently with the active mushroom compounds, all of them, which I don't think we'll ever know what they are. And why do we need to know what they are?
They also do cause gastric upset, the toxin itself.
But that's terminology again. Yeah. Because ibotenic acid in Amanita muscaria, that everybody says is a toxin and it's dangerous and you shouldn't use it, is also an incredibly valuable healing medicine that affects glutamate and the cholinergic pathways. It's dosing, that's everything. Yeah. And that's what makes it a toxin, is when you take too much. But also, there are healing states over there where, like when I use it, when I first started using ibotenic acid, I couldn't use it in any amount because it would go to this one nerve in my back and cause incredible pain. And then if I took more, of course, more twitching and muscle aches and gastric issues. But then I started doing the work on that as I would use higher and higher doses of like a 50-50 decarb mix of the two. It's like it just wouldn't let go of that one nerve. It just went to that one nerve. And the more I did work on that and finally uncovered memories as to why, that's where some serious abuse happened. That was a like damaged nerve. Memories.
That is fascinating.
So now why is that a toxin? It's a medicine. Well, but I don't like how it feels.
Yeah.
But it's doing work that may not feel so great because it's doing surgery. It's healing me. And our gut is filtering and pulling toxins out of our food, neutralizing it, pulling nutrients out of our food. It's doing the same thing to these healing medicines, that it's pulling toxins out of the gut. Yeah. That's why stress and trauma and pain will also cause gastric upset. So you can say, tomato, toxin medicine. Right. It's all about who's taking it, how they're taking it, and what their intention is.
Well, I mean, but if you could come up with a way to take mushrooms without shitting your pants.
I wouldn't do it.
You wouldn't do it without shitting your pants.
I would absolutely take the mushroom.
We need to talk more about this. So
I haven't done ayahuasca yet, but I will not do it until I am fully ready to embrace throwing up and shitting at the same time.
Oh my God. So we're really getting down to it.
It's part of the process.
What things are okay. Maybe we've identified my hesitancy to do this is my unwillingness to shit my pants.
You don't always, though. Like, I haven't done that on psilocybin yet. I haven't had to throw up or shit my pants. But on Amanita muscaria, like for the first 2 years that I used it.
Did you say 3 years?
I've used it for 5. But
you just said 3 years. But you put up with this for 3 years?
I put up with the muscle and nerve pain for 3 years. But I didn't actually start having to shit for 3 years because the pain and the toxins and the issues and the trauma that I was dealing with, it took layers and layers to get to. And when I finally got to it, I was more emotionally throwing up, venting and pulling up and crying from a place that was from the depths of my beingness, that I knew shedding was taking place. And it was only in the moving of that emotional pain that was stored in my heart. The minute that stuff started coming out, I had to shit. And then it was incredibly painful coming out that end also. Because in our society, we think our physical processes are completely separate from our emotional ones. And that is just so wrong. It wasn't a mistake or an accident that it all blew wide open. And when it was over, literally, not only by me moaning and groaning the pain out, but shitting the pain out, but crying the pain out. And when it was over, I was lighter in a way that went on with me for the rest of my life. Will go on with me for the rest of I'm lighter in a way that I will never have words to explain. And that's why I won't ever take an entheogen without taking all of what's going to come with it, because it's wise that way.
I mean, that's quite a sales pitch.
But it's a toxin and a poison because it'll make you sick. It's like, yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, so you look at toxins through chemistry and you look at toxins through personal shitting. You know what I mean? And it's just like, so there's, of course, I mean, that's why I wanted to do this with you is I'm team chemical. You know, what does the chemical structure look like? Is it an identified toxin? What is it? You know, has there been a study? Has it been double blind? Blah, blah, blah. And I do care about those things. I think you do too.
I don't want people just taking massive amounts of something to just sit there and get sick and throw up and go, well, I'll never do that again. That was bullshit.
Right.
Yes, it was bullshit, but it wasn't the medicine.
Yeah.
It was that you didn't have guidance through it.
So that's a really good point that you bring up. So when people are talking about therapeutic settings for psilocybin, the guide, the setting, the music, and the eye coverings have been talked about, and I think even recently have been talked about as some of the most important things that you can do. Do you agree with that, those 4 things?
Not at all. What one person's set and setting is another person's nightmare. And I know when I did it on camera, it's on amanitadreamer.net. I do a lot of drugs on camera and they're all there because YouTube censored them or whatever. And when I did my first time, you know, taking it was like 5 grams, which for a lot of people is a high dose. And that was my first time taking psilocybin. And I did it on camera. That's how I wanted to do it because it was my first foray into it. I wanted safety. I wanted people around me. I wanted the lights not bright, but on. I didn't want, you know, dried whatever grams in a dark room, eyes covered, whatever. That would have been terrifying for me.
Yeah.
I needed what I got. I wanted noise. I wanted people around. I wanted that safety net. I wanted to be able to talk on camera and be authentic. I wanted to not have to do too much work. I wanted the mushroom to just take me and do whatever it wanted to do without an agenda. That's what I wanted. And you wouldn't believe the hate I got for that.
Interesting.
The shaming.
Interesting.
You know, just like pick shamers when you do your mushroom picking videos, you know, it's like our processes are ours and those are sacred. And if you want to take this drug first and then this man-made drug over here because you feel like that's what you need, and then you want to go back over here to this natural one, I don't think that anybody should be able to tell you how your mental health should unfold, not even the government, but also no spiritual person. And that's why I try to take the stance that I do publicly, where I don't hate corporations. They serve a purpose. They're doing work for people that are afraid to go out and find it themselves. They want to be able to get it off a shelf. They would like to go to their therapist that they trusted and built a relationship with to take it in that setting. They have that right. This is 2023. Let's give people that ability. But let's also not take away their ability to just use it recreationally at a party and trip out with each other on 3 grams and dance and enjoy each other's company.
You know, I have a little note here that says, why is alcohol okay for pleasure, but psilocybin isn't? Why does it have to be clinical every time? Why does it have to be addressing a trauma? Can there be a time where you have an experience for fun and that's okay?
I think that comes from Christianity and that idea. Well, I mean, there was a time where chocolate was sinful because it tasted too good and could cause lasciviousness. And it's that austerity idea that you can't have fun or feel good because that's sinful, you know, that comes from the Christian church. And somehow people have sort of translated that over to earth-based things because they cause such profound healing because we've confused spirituality with religion, with freedom. And those are separate things. And I think people that come at me and be like, you should be ashamed of yourself for taking Muscimol and making a video of you being ridiculous and saying stupid shit on camera. That's disrespectful to the mushroom. Well, I beg to differ. I know the mushroom. I have regular conversations with it. It's like, get it. This is hilarious. Isn't this great and fun? Like, why do we think that entheogenic fungi and plants aren't all about the fun? They bring the fun. And after the hard work, when you're in the depths of it and you're crying and you're shitting yourself, and then you come out of it, they laugh. And then they tell you, but it's all really just a game and it's a silly joke. All that shit you just went through was bullshit and it's all a game and it's all a silly joke. And you've really got to stop taking yourself so seriously. And that's why as you're coming out of all of that, the best part of the trip is after the deepest work is done and you can keep your eyes open and you can walk again, because then music is incredible and food is amazing and you just love everybody and you just want to hug everyone and taste things and listen to music and have fun. And it's like, how do you ignore that part in favor of the work and go, but it's so holy and you should just revere it as medicine and it shouldn't be fun? And it's like, oh my God, I fully believe that they grieve at how hard I have to work and they can't wait for the day that I can just take them for shits and giggles. No more shits, just giggles.
Yeah, you also shit your pants. So let's just... Oh my God.
Go back out of my body and laugh at me. Some stupid shit.
Well, the next episode is not going to be me doing this. Not after this conversation.
This was Amanita. Oh, God.
I'm not going to do it.
Fuck.
I'm going to stick to my probiotic kombucha.
I can't handle that.
Absolutely
That's what I
no
can't do.
GI effects with my kombucha. All right, that's going to be it. There are things that we're going to talk about in the next episode. They're not going to be as funny.
I don't know. Everything's funny eventually.
This is FungiPhonic. I am Gretchen Testa.
I'm Amanita Dreamer.
Can I call you Nita D? For short?
Oh my God, no, I don't. Not right now. Let's not. Oh, shit.
Okay, Dreamer for short.
Okay.